I want to tell you a story from a time in my life when I was still learning who I was. A time when I was young, quiet, unsure of myself, and trying to survive in a world that didn't care about how gentle a person was. Welcome to Stories by Amy. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now, let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. It is Strain. How one person can walk into your life and leave a mark so deep that you still think about it decades later. Not because they were special, not because they helped you grow, but because the way they treated you changed the way you understood the world and yourself. I was 18, fresh out of school, still holding onto this innocent belief that adults knew better, behaved better, and treated people with some basic level of respect. I was wrong, painfully wrong. Back then, I got my first real job in the Canadian oil patch. It felt huge. I felt like I had finally stepped into the world of men. A real job, real hours, real money. $20 an hour, more than anyone in my family had ever made in their first job. But behind that paycheck, behind that sense of pride, there was a darkness waiting for me, a man named Gary. The truth is, I still don't fully understand what creates a person like him. Someone who looks at a younger worker, a kid, and sees not a teammate, not a person to guide, not someone to help grow, but someone to break. And he tried. Every day, in small ways and big ways. In ways that made me question my worth. In ways that made me wonder if this world had a place for someone like me, someone who wasn't loud or cruel or trying to overpower others just to feel strong. Back then, I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak, though I believed that about myself at the time. I stayed quiet because silence was all I had ever known. I grew up without many voices telling me I was worth something, without a father to teach me things or to defend me. And when Gary found out about that, he used it the way some people use a knife, slowly, carefully, making sure it hurt. I didn't fight back. Not at first. I just worked. Endured. Waited for the days to pass. Told myself the paycheck mattered more than the pain. But even the quiet have a breaking point. Even the gentle have a line they do not cross until someone forces them to. And one day, after 3 months of insults, humiliation, and being treated like less than human, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was anger. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe it was the simple realization that surviving someone else's cruelty shouldn't be the only thing you wake up to do. Whatever it was, that feeling changed everything. This is the story of that moment. The moment I stopped letting someone else decide who I was. The moment I learned that sometimes, the smallest act of standing up for yourself, even in a strange, messy, dramatic way, becomes the moment you finally breathe again. And yes, this story is emotional, not because it is tragic, but because it was the first time in my life when I looked at someone who tried to break me, and I didn't break. I want to tell you the whole journey, from the quiet beginnings, to the rising tension, to the day everything changed on a lonely highway in the Canadian countryside. This is my story. And maybe, in some quiet way, it might remind you of a time when you stood up for yourself too. I grew up in a small place, the kind of town where people work with their hands and learn to fix things long before they learn to speak about feelings. Most boys grew up working on trucks with their fathers, learning tools, learning confidence. But my story was different. My father wasn't in my life for very long. Just long enough for me to remember that he existed, but not long enough for me to remember what his voice sounded like, or what he might have taught me if he had stayed. Because of that, I always felt a little behind other boys. They knew how to use drills, wrenches, saws, tools I had only seen from a distance. They walked with this natural sense of belonging, like they were already made for the world they were stepping into. I, on the other hand, felt like I was always trying to catch up, always trying to prove something, always hoping no one noticed the holes in my experience. So when I got the job in the oil patch, I thought maybe this was my chance. My chance to finally feel like everyone else. My chance to grow up the way I imagined grown men did. The oil patch was far from home. It was cold. It was rough. It demanded strength and grit, even on days when you had none left to give. But I didn't complain, I didn't know how, I just worked. Every day, shift after shift. Learning as I went, hoping someone would eventually see that I was trying my best. And then there was Gary. Gary was in his mid-50s, a man who had clearly lived a hard life, though not the kind that teaches humility or gratitude. He was the kind of man who carried his pain like a weapon, using it to hurt people before they could get close enough to hurt him. The first day we worked together, he sized me up with a single look. Not a friendly one, not a curious one, more like the look someone gives a stray dog they don't want near their yard. "You ever used a power drill before?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, not really," he snorted. "Didn't your dad teach you anything?" It was a simple question, a normal one. Hit like a slap, I made the mistake of telling him the truth. My dad, he wasn't around much. And from that moment on, Gary knew exactly where to strike, exactly how to make me feel small, exactly which words would sink the deepest. For the next 3 months, the same pattern repeated. Every mistake I made, no matter how small, became proof that I was useless. Every quiet moment became an opportunity for him to remind me that someone like me didn't belong here. You're, s- you're clueless. It makes sense your dad walked out. Some people aren't cut out for real work, you're one of them. Every sentence came wrapped in a fake laugh. Every insult was delivered as if it were a harmless joke. And when I didn't laugh with him, he always said the same thing. "Relax, can't you take a joke?" I didn't answer. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't trust my voice. If I spoke, I felt like everything inside me would come spilling out, the anger, the sadness, the confusion, so I stayed quiet. We worked long hours in remote places. Long drives, long nights, cold mornings. And in every part of that routine, Gary found a way to remind me that he was in control. He drank every night. A lot, too much, but alcohol didn't soften him. It only made him unpredictable. Sometimes he was almost friendly, telling stories and laughing at memories that seemed too light for the man I knew during the day. But even then, he never treated me like an equal, just someone he tolerated until the next shot hit his bloodstream. By the second month, he made me drive us everywhere. His truck, his fuel, his rules. He got paid for every kilometer. I got nothing extra. He would fall asleep in the passenger seat, snoring heavily, smelling of old whiskey and frustration. I drove carefully, listening to the silence, trying not to think about how trapped I felt. Every morning, he would wake up angry, hungover, irritated that the world hadn't arranged itself the way he wanted it to. He used that irritation on me, every day. And every day I told myself to endure, just make it to the weekend, just make it to the paycheck, just make it another month. But silence can only hold so much. And one night it broke. The night everything changed began like all the others. Cold air, a quiet town, a dull ache in my chest that I had learned to ignore. We had finished a long shift, the kind that made your hands ache and your boots feel heavier with every step. We were staying in a small town, just one of many along the endless roads of the oil patch. These places were quiet, almost forgotten by the rest of the world, but they held a strange kind of peace. A peace I wished I could feel inside myself. But peace was impossible with Gary around. We went to a little restaurant attached to a bar. Places like that were all we ever had. Dim lights, local music playing softly in the background, people talking quietly in corners, tired after their own long days. The air smelled like fried food and stale beer. Gary ordered the same drink he always did, whiskey, a double. Before the waiter even walked away, he added another. A man who drank to escape, not to enjoy. I sat across from him, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea because I never drank on work trips. I didn't want to lose focus, didn't want to give him one more thing to mock. He stared at me in that way he often did, like he was waiting for me to do something wrong. I looked down. I always did. For the first few minutes, he told stories from his past, stories that didn't paint him as a bad man, but as someone who had never learned how to let life soften him. Stories of being laid off, stories of ex-wives, stories of small fights with big consequences, stories that always ended with him saying the same thing: "Life's tough, kid, tougher than you." He didn't say it with affection. He said it like a reminder that he had survived things I couldn't imagine, and therefore he had the right to treat me however he wanted. But that night, something inside me finally reached its limit. He finished his drink quickly, and I could already see the shift in his posture. His shoulders drooped a little, his voice became heavier. His eyes grew sharper, searching for something to criticize. I don't know why I spoke up that night. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe something inside me whispered that I deserved more, or maybe silence had simply become unbearable. "Gary," I said quietly, "you sleep most of the time when I drive, and you're getting paid for every kilometer. Don't you think, maybe you could pay me a little for the driving, just something fair?" I didn't say it with anger, I said it gently, carefully, hoping he'd understand, but people like Gary didn't understand softness. They resented it. His face hardened, not gradually, not slowly, but instantly, like my words struck something deep inside him. "You think I owe you money?" he asked. I swallowed. "I'm just saying I drive every day. You get paid for all the miles. Maybe we could share that a bit." He leaned back, his jaw tightening. His hand curled around his glass even though it was empty. "You're lucky you even have this job," he muttered. "You want money from me, for what? Doing your job? Don't be stupid." That word again, stupid, something inside me shook. "I'm not being stupid," I said softly. "I'm just asking." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You're ungrateful, that's what you are. I give you a ride, I give you experience, and you whine about money, unbelievable." "No wonder He stopped there, but I knew where he was going. He had gone there before. The thing about Gary was that he didn't need volume to hurt you, just a few well-placed words. I felt something warm sting behind my eyes, my throat tightened. I wasn't angry, not really, just tired, so incredibly tired. He noticed my eyes and instead of stopping, he smirked. "Are you crying?" he asked. "Seriously, you're crying over this?" I looked away. I didn't want him to see the tears. But of course he did. He laughed. Not loudly, just a low, mocking sound that made my chest feel tight. "That's pathetic," he muttered. "You want extra money for driving? Fine, I'll give you something. How about I talk to the boss and get you fired? Then you won't have anything to cry about." The tears that slid down my face weren't dramatic. They were quiet, heavy, the kind that fall when you've held too much for too long. I didn't yell back. I didn't defend myself. I just sat there, staring at the table, feeling small, feeling broken, feeling like this man had somehow taken a part of me I didn't even know I had been holding on to. He stood up from the table, tossed money down, and walked toward the bar to order another drink. I stayed seated, staring at my untouched dinner. That moment, those few minutes, were the final push I didn't know I had been waiting for. Because somewhere between the insult and the threat, something in me snapped. Not loudly. Not violently. It was more like a quiet click inside my chest, a tiny shift, a whisper of self-respect I thought I had lost. And suddenly, I knew one thing: I needed to get away from him. I needed to get off his crew. I needed to stop letting this man decide who I was. But life has a strange way of giving you opportunities exactly when you reach your breaking point. And the opportunity I was about to get was nothing I could have planned. Before I tell you about the next morning, the morning everything changed, I need to explain something about myself from that time in my life. Back then, I didn't fight back when people pushed me. Not physically, not verbally, I just grew quiet. People often mistake silence for weakness, but silence isn't weak. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's the only thing you have when fighting back would make everything worse. For 3 months, I had used silence to protect myself. But silence also builds pressure. And one day, that pressure has to go somewhere. The next morning, we got up early for the long drive to the site. The sun wasn't up yet. The world was still asleep. The cold air bit at my skin as I walked toward the truck. Gary climbed into the passenger seat, already half asleep from the night's drinking. He didn't speak, didn't look at me, just closed his eyes and drifted into that deep, heavy sleep he always fell into. I sat behind the wheel, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The engine hummed softly. The sky slowly shifted from dark blue to a pale morning gray. I looked at Gary, at his slumped body, his snores, his complete lack of awareness, and I felt nothing, not anger, not fear, just a calm, steady emptiness. The kind that only comes after you've already cried everything out of yourself. I began driving. The long highway stretched in front of me, kilometer after kilometer of open road. Quiet, still, almost peaceful, and then I saw it. A semi-truck parked on the side of the road, engine running, driver standing outside getting some fresh air, and in one single moment a plan appeared in my mind, not out of cruelty, not out of revenge, but out of something simple. I needed Gary to feel even one small piece of what he had made me feel every day for the past 3 months. Fear, vulnerability, the feeling of not being in control, not to harm him. Just to make him understand that words have weight, actions have consequences, and that even the quietest people can reach a point where they say, "Enough." I didn't drive straight toward the semi. Not yet. Instead, I let the moment breathe. The road stretched ahead of me like a thin ribbon, and all around us the world felt surprisingly peaceful. That contrast struck me, how calm everything was outside, and how stormy things felt inside me. There was something strange about long drives in the dark. Time didn't feel real. Thoughts came and went like low clouds drifting across the sky, and on that morning my thoughts were unusually clear. I realized in that quiet space inside the truck cab that I had spent years allowing people to talk down to me. Not just Gary, people at school, relatives who thought kindness was weakness, friends who used humor as an excuse to hurt. I had survived all of it by shrinking myself, by staying quiet, by disappearing into the background. Silence had always been my shelter, but that shelter had turned into a cage without me noticing. As I drove, I kept glancing at Gary. His breathing was heavy and uneven. His cheeks were flushed from last night's whiskey. He looked older than he had the day before, like the weight of his own choices had finally begun settling on him. It was strange to feel a hint of sympathy in that moment. But human emotions are rarely simple. I didn't hate him, even after everything he said. Even after all the small cuts that eventually opened into deeper wounds. I just wanted him to stop hurting people, to stop hurting me, perhaps to feel even once how it felt to be powerless. The highway rose slightly ahead of us and the sky brightened by a shade. That early morning light, still thin, still quiet, always made me feel like I was waking up inside a dream. In a way, I was, because for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't trying to make myself small. I felt steady, not strong, not brave, just steady, and sometimes that's all it takes. The wind outside brushed lightly against the sides of the truck, the engine hummed beneath my feet, and the semi-truck ahead waited like an unmoving giant in the distance. Every few minutes, Gary's breathing shifted and I worried he might wake up. Not because I feared what he'd say, not because I feared the anger, but because if he woke now, I might lose the one chance to reclaim even a small part of myself. As the gap between us and the parked semi slowly closed, memories began to surface, uninvited but familiar. I remembered being a child, sitting at the kitchen table, trying to complete schoolwork while someone berated me for not knowing simple things. Not yelling, just disappointed. just dismissive, just certain that I was less than other kids. I remembered being told to toughen up, as if softness was something shameful. As if emotions made you weak. As if needing kindness was something to hide. All those little memories, forgotten but not gone, sat in my chest like tiny stones. I didn't realize how heavy they were until that long drive gave me the space to feel their weight. Sometimes, the moment you decide to change isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just a single breath when you finally say, I deserve better. We were still far from the semi when Gary shifted in his seat. He didn't wake, but he mumbled something. Something slurred, half-formed. I didn't understand the words, but his tone was the same tone he used when he insulted me, low, amused, almost bored. Even in sleep, he carried that bitterness. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, not in anger, just in recognition. People often become the stories they tell themselves. Gary's story seemed to be one of resentment, of things lost, of chances he believed others had taken from him. I was simply the easiest target around. The road curved gently, and when the truck straightened again, the semi was much closer. Close enough that I could see the driver leaning against the side of the cab, sipping from a travel mug. He looked peaceful, like a man who had made his peace with life's imperfections. For a moment, I wondered what he would think of me. This young man stopping on the side of the road in the early morning. Would he think I was running away? Was I? Or was I finally running toward something? The more I thought about Gary, the clearer something became. He wasn't the only obstacle in my life, he was just the most recent one. The loudest one, but there had been many like him. People who confused cruelty with strength. People who saw gentleness as a weakness. And maybe, just maybe, the reason Gary affected me so deeply was because he reminded me of all the voices I never spoke back to. I wasn't planning on hurting him. Not physically. Not emotionally. I just wanted a moment where the imbalance of power shifted, where the man who made me feel small would feel, even if briefly, what it was like to not be in control. It wasn't revenge, it was a release. We passed a small wooden sign announcing the distance to the next town. Only a few more kilometers. The air inside the truck felt colder than outside, or maybe it was just the tension sitting quietly beside me. I rolled the window down the slightest bit. A thin line of fresh, cold air drifted in, brushing across my cheek. It woke me up in a way that coffee never could. Gary snored softly, a slow, grumbling sound. It made something inside me ache a little, not for him, but for the version of me that had tolerated him for so long. I thought about quitting, about walking away from the job entirely, about going home and starting over. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered, you don't have to run, you just have to stop letting people walk over you. As we neared the semi, the outline of the truck became clearer. Tall, wide, unmoving, I slowed down slightly, not enough to wake Gary but enough to steady my breathing. The driver turned his head in my direction. He noticed us. Just a simple glance, but enough to open a tiny doorway in the moment. If I spoke to him, if I asked for help, if I set this strange plan in motion, everything would change. And yet, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. Not ready for confrontation. Not ready for consequences. Just ready to stop being the version of myself that kept shrinking. The truck moved slowly toward the pullout, the tires crunching softly over gravel. And in the silence just before I took that final step, that small, decisive movement that would forever separate the before and after of this story, something unexpected happened. A thought crossed my mind. A gentle one, a kind one. People break in different ways, it whispered. Gary breaks outward. You break inward. But you are allowed to stop breaking. That thought didn't make me angry. It didn't make me sad. It made me human. It made me breathe. And with that breath, I realized something simple but important. My plan wasn't about punishing Gary. It was about freeing myself. So as I brought the truck to a quiet stop behind the semi, as the cold morning air filled the cabin as Gary slept beside me, unaware of everything, I finally allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in months. Control, not over him, not over destiny, but over myself. I stepped out of the truck gently, closing the door quietly so it wouldn't wake him. The gravel crunched under my boots. The air hit my face with a clean, sharp chill. The sky stretched above me, soft and pale like a calm beginning. The semi-driver noticed me walking up. He lowered his mug, curious but not alarmed. I nodded to him. A simple gesture. And in that moment, with all the calmness of a man stepping into the next chapter of his life, I began to speak. I didn't realize the shift when it first happened. Moments like these rarely arrive with thunder or grand announcements. Instead, they slip into your life the way a soft breeze slips beneath a half-open window, subtle, almost forgettable, until you suddenly realize the entire room feels different. For me, that moment began on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day that felt so ordinary it almost disguised what was about to unfold. It started with a call when I wasn't even expecting. Gary had gone downstairs to the lobby, claiming he needed fresh air, though the hotel air wasn't any fresher than the stale exhaustion between us. I stayed upstairs, checking inventory lists and reviewing messages from our suppliers. That's when my phone buzzed, not with work, not with an alarm, but with a name I never expected to see again. It was Elaine, the woman I had once considered my closest friend before life, distance, and 1,000 unspoken reasons had scattered us far from each other. She rarely called, mostly just sent short texts during holidays. Yet today her name was glowing on my screen, steady and insistent, like a doorbell someone rings only when they desperately need you to answer. I hesitated before tapping accept. Maybe I already sensed what her voice would carry. When I finally answered, the sound of her breath on the other end was uneven, rushed, worried, not the calm tone she usually had. "I've been trying to reach you," she said. "Are you alone?" The question startled me more than the urgency in her voice. I wasn't alone, not really, but I also wasn't accompanied in any meaningful way that mattered. Gary was somewhere downstairs, probably pacing, probably irritated about something microscopic. But emotionally, in every way that mattered, yes, I was alone. "Yes," I whispered, her exhale cracked as if she had been holding it in too long. "Good, because you need to hear something," she said. There was no drama in her voice, only a kind of weary certainty, the way someone sounds when they've finally given up trying to protect you from the truth. I sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly cold. For a second, I felt like a child again, waiting for an adult to tell me something that would change everything I knew. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from that strange sensation that occurs right before a storm you somehow already feel approaching. "Gary came to see me last week," she said. My heartbeat stumbled. Not stopped, just stumbled like someone missing a step on a staircase. I closed my eyes and an ache spread through my chest, slow and heavy. She continued, her voice cracking only once. "He asked me not to tell you, but I can't keep it anymore." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, heavy, alive, like a presence sitting beside me. "What did he say?" I asked, though part of me already feared the answer. "He told me he's been thinking about leaving," she whispered. "He said the business stresses him out. He said he feels trapped. He said he doesn't know if he can do this anymore." I didn't speak. I didn't cry or gasp or shout. My reaction was quieter than that, so quiet it felt almost unnatural. I simply breathed in, then out, slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter something fragile inside me. Elaine continued softly, "I thought he'd talk to you first. I thought you two would sort it out. But then he mentioned making arrangements behind your back, and that's when I knew I had to tell you. You deserve to know. You always did." Something inside me tilted gently, like a picture frame that finally slides out of alignment after hanging crooked for years. Not broken, just no longer pretending to be straight. "Thank you," I whispered. My voice didn't shake. If anything, it sounded calmer than usual, almost detached, as if I had been waiting not for the words, but for the moment when everything finally stopped pretending. After the call ended, I remained sitting on the bed for a long time. No thoughts, no plans, no tears. Just a stillness I didn't recognize. And then, without fully knowing why, I stood up and walked to the window. The city looked ordinary, the same cars, the same people, the same gray-blue sky. But something inside me was not the same anymore. For the first time in months, maybe years, my heartbeat didn't race with worry about what Gary might say or want or demand. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a life where I didn't walk on the edges of his mood swings. A life where my days weren't measured by how carefully I managed someone else's emotions. The realization didn't come with anger. It arrived with a quiet sadness, the kind that feels almost like relief, like putting down a weight you didn't even know you had been carrying. When the door finally clicked open and Gary stepped back inside, complaining about the terrible coffee, something in me had already shifted. He didn't notice. He never noticed the quiet things, but I did, for the first time. I noticed myself. This was the moment, the gentle, almost invisible moment, where the road ahead silently split into two paths, and even though I hadn't stepped onto either one yet, I already knew nothing was going to be the same after today. I didn't respond when Gary walked back into the room, not because I was angry and not because I wanted to punish him with silence. It was simply that my mind felt suspended, like a curtain still swaying after someone has just brushed past it. He moved around the room with his usual restless energy, unbothered, unaware, humming under his breath as if the world hadn't just cracked open in my hands moments earlier. He tossed his keys on the dresser with a familiar clink. He didn't even glance in my direction. Maybe he didn't notice the quiet tension around me, or maybe he was simply used to me being silent. My silence had always been convenient for him. I watched as he paced near the desk, rearranging things that didn't need to be rearranged. Straightening a pen, adjusting the angle of a notepad, tugging at the edge of a brochure that was already flat and perfectly aligned. This wasn't new. When he was anxious, he busied his hands. When he was guilty, his hands never rested. Before Elaine's call, I might have asked what was bothering him, gently nudging him to talk, offering calmness the way one offers water to a person too dehydrated to ask for it. Today, I didn't move from the bed. I didn't lean forward or soften my voice to draw him out. I simply observed. There was something strangely freeing about that. He finally noticed me, or rather, the absence of some expected response from me. "You okay?" he asked, but the question floated out of him without depth, without weight. It was one of those questions people ask out of routine, not concern. "I'm fine," I said, and even to my own ears, the words sounded like they had been wrapped in cotton. Soft, muted, he nodded, already accepting the version of the truth that made life easiest for him. "Good," he said, exhaling, "because we still need to check those invoices before the supplier meeting tomorrow." I nodded back, but inside something had shifted. Not dramatically, more like a small internal adjustment, a quiet turning of a knob that changes the tone of an entire instrument. I opened my laptop and began working. He sat across from me, typing too loudly, tapping his fingers when his screen froze, sighing as if the entire world were designed solely to inconvenience him. Ordinarily, I would have soothed him. I would have said, "It's okay," or "Let me try," or "Don't stress." But now I simply let him be. The distance didn't come from anger. It came from clarity. And clarity, once it arrives, doesn't leave when someone sighs loudly across a hotel room. Around sunset, Gary announced he was going out just for a bit. He didn't say where, he didn't ask if I needed anything. He just left, and for the first time, I didn't feel that familiar flutter of worry at being alone. Instead, I felt peaceful. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and opened the window slightly, letting in the cool evening air. It smelled like rain, fresh, metallic, full of promise. The gray sky outside felt almost like it understood me. I sat on the armchair by the window and let my thoughts drift, not backward toward pain, not forward toward fear, but into that rare middle space where clarity lives. Elaine's words replayed in my mind, not as echoes of panic, but as pieces of truth settling slowly into place. He feels trapped. He's been thinking of leaving. He made plans behind your back. Each sentence felt like a puzzle piece that had been missing for years. And now that they were all on the table, the picture was becoming painfully clear. I wasn't blindsided. I wasn't devastated. Not in the way I would have expected. It wasn't heartbreak I felt, it was recognition. Recognition of all the small moments I had brushed aside, the tiny fractures I had learned to ignore. Recognition of the way he shifted away from me at night. Recognition of the way his eyes wandered when he thought I wasn't looking. Recognition of how everything, every decision, every discomfort, every complaint, somehow always fell on me to absorb. The truth hadn't arrived like a blow. It had arrived like light, soft, steady, revealing what had been there all along. One by one, small, seemingly insignificant memories floated to the surface, suddenly sharp with context. Like the morning 3 weeks ago when he stared at his phone for a full minute before flipping it face down when I entered the room. Or the comment he made about feeling stuck during a late-night drive right after a long argument with a client. He had said it casually, laughing afterward, brushing it off. But now I could hear the truth that had been hiding underneath. Or the afternoon he suggested we take a break from expanding the business. At the time, I had assumed he meant financial strain. I didn't realize he meant me. The memories weren't painful, just clear. And clarity, even when it hurts, still feels like oxygen. He came in smelling faintly of cologne, not the one he usually wore, but something sharper, more musky. For the first time, instead of questioning him, instead of feeling jealousy gnaw at me, I simply observed him. His clothes, the way he avoided eye contact, the slight flush on his face. When he set his phone screen down again, I didn't react. He glanced at me, expecting something, maybe a comment, maybe a question, maybe reassurance. But I remained still. That stillness made him restless. People who depend on your silence often become uncomfortable when it stops striving to protect them. "You're quiet today," he said, searching my face. "I'm thinking." "About what?" "Everything." He froze, not dramatically, but just enough for me to notice. He didn't ask what everything meant. He didn't want to know. He simply nodded and walked toward the bathroom. A quiet shift had taken place between us. He felt it. I felt it. Even the room felt different, as if the walls themselves had loosened their grip. I watched the rise and fall of his breathing, not with affection or resentment, but with a calm that startled me. For so long I had lived at the mercy of his moods, anticipating them, managing them, softening them. Tonight I felt no such obligation. I reached for my phone and opened the Notes app. Not to expose him, not to accuse him, just to write. To unravel the knot inside me with words, the only way I knew how. I wrote about the quiet pressure, the unspoken weight. The way I had shrunk myself to fit the spaces he left for me. I wrote about how tired I had become, not physically, but in that deep, hollow way that makes even breathing feel like work. I wrote until my fingers ached. And with every word, I felt something loosen, something that had been wrapped too tightly around my ribs. Gary woke up grumpy, annoyed that the shower didn't heat quickly enough, irritated that the hotel breakfast was too bland, frustrated that the supplier had sent the wrong confirmation email. Normally, I would have soothed him with gentle phrases. But today, I let him complain without cushioning his irritation with softness. I responded simply, directly, without bending myself into gentleness for his comfort. He felt the difference. I could see it in the way he kept glancing at me, as if searching for something familiar. But that version of me, the one who fixed every mood, shielded every flaw, carried every emotional burden, was quietly dissolving, not out of revenge, but out of awakening. The meeting was routine, numbers, inventory details, timelines. But the supplier spoke to me more than usual. He admired how organized our system was. He complimented the way I clarified misunderstandings. Gary watched this with narrowed eyes, not jealous but surprised, as if he had forgotten I was capable of holding a room's attention. On the drive back to the hotel, he finally spoke. "You were different today." "How so?" "I don't know, just different, more confident, I guess." I didn't look at him. Instead, I watched the city passing by through the car window, the rows of buildings, the movement of people, the flow of cars. Maybe for the first time, I was moving with the world, not behind it. "You're not thinking anything crazy, right?" I turned to him slowly. "What would be crazy?" "You know what I mean." A hint of fear flickered in his eyes. "Like leaving or giving up on us." That word "us" was suddenly very heavy. I didn't answer right away. My silence made him grip the steering wheel tighter. Finally, I said quietly, "I'm just thinking, that's all." But he knew. Or at least, he sensed that my thinking was no longer the kind he could control. He didn't speak again the rest of the drive. We were back in the hotel room, sorting receipts, double-checking orders. He was irritable, I was calm. And somewhere between one spreadsheet and the next, something inside me clicked into place. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even emotional. It was simply clear. I didn't belong in the version of life where I was the caretaker of someone who didn't care for me. I didn't belong in a relationship where my silence was more valuable than my voice. I didn't belong in a life where someone planned their escape while expecting me to hold everything together. For the first time, I acknowledged it completely, not as fear, not as suspicion, but as truth. Gary wasn't the turning point. I was. I didn't notice the exact moment when things began to shift from quiet tension to something heavier, but I knew it was happening long before I admitted it to myself. It was like living beside a coastline and watching the tide creep higher each day, slow, steady, predictable, yet somehow still surprising when it finally reaches your feet. The turning point had settled inside me like a small flame, steady and warm, and nothing Gary did afterward could put it out. If anything, his actions fed it. The next morning, he woke up already irritated. He muttered to himself in the bathroom, slamming a drawer then another. When he came out, his shirt was half untucked and he looked like someone who had slept on a problem instead of a pillow. "We're late," he said even though we were. He always needed something external to blame whenever he didn't like what was happening inside him. I folded the last of the receipts into the folder without looking up. "We have 30 minutes. "Well, we should have left 10 minutes ago." He huffed like a man carrying the weight of the world, though he rarely carried anything heavier than his own impatience. He waited for me to react, to apologize, to hurry, to soothe, but I stayed still. His frustration had nowhere to land, so it circled around him like restless birds. "Fine, let's go," he muttered, grabbing the keys, not tense, not angry, just clear. For years, I had taken responsibility for the emotional weather in every room we shared. If he was stormy, I held the umbrella. If he was cold, I brought warmth. If he was harsh, I softened myself until his words no longer echoed. But now I sat quietly as he complained about traffic, the hotel's water pressure, the supplier's slow emails. I didn't argue, I didn't soothe. I didn't adjust myself to match his moods. I simply listened and then let the words drift past me like leaves in water. He felt the difference. I could feel him watching me out of the corner of his eye. "What's going on with you lately?" he asked. His tone wasn't cruel, it was confused, almost lost. "Nothing," I said softly. He squinted at the road ahead, then tightened his grip on the steering wheel. It doesn't feel like nothing. I didn't respond. And that silence carried more weight than any explanation ever could. The morning was routine, checking equipment, confirming data, walking through inventory. But everything Gary did felt louder, though his voice hadn't changed volume at all. When he couldn't find a packing list, he blamed the suppliers. When the printer jammed, he blamed the machine. When the forklift driver parked slightly crooked, he whispered that people were losing basic intelligence. He was a man unraveling by degrees. Normally, I would have stepped in, helping him regain balance with gentle phrases or quiet organizing. Today, I didn't. Instead, I spoke directly to the shipping manager myself, handled the missing documents, fixed the printer, coordinated the incoming order. I didn't do it to spite him. I did it because it was easier than waiting for him to calm down enough to function. Gary watched me move through the warehouse with steady purpose. He followed behind me, pretending to stay involved, but his eyes kept darting between me and the floor, like he'd suddenly forgotten where he stood in our unspoken dynamic. At one point, he muttered, "You're taking over everything today." "I'm just helping." Helping usually means asking first. I paused, not from guilt, but from realization. He didn't want help, he wanted control. And he was losing it, not because I took it from him, but because he had never truly held it. We sat at a small diner near the warehouse, the kind with fading menus and cracked leather seats. Gary stared at his sandwich like it had offended him. He chewed loudly, sighed often, and tapped his nails on the table between bites. Finally, he asked, "Are you angry at me?" It wasn't a defensive question, it was a scared one. "No," I answered truthfully. "Are you sure? Because you're different." "People change," he frowned. "That fast?" I gave a gentle shrug. "Sometimes clarity comes all at once." He swallowed hard. The phrase landed exactly where he feared it would. "And what did you get clarity about?" This was the first time I had seen him genuinely uncomfortable. Not irritated, not frustrated, but uncomfortable in a way that suggested he knew a part of him had been seen, fully seen, and he didn't know how to hide anymore. I didn't answer right away. My silence made him shift in his seat like the vinyl was suddenly too warm. He whispered, "Did something happen?" I could have told him. I could have asked him about the calls, the secrecy, the plans he had made without me. I could have confronted him with tears or anger or quiet accusation, but I didn't. Instead, I said softly, "Nothing new happened, I'm just noticing what was there." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he looked down. And he stayed looking down, as if the truth I had finally spoken, not with words but with calmness, was lighting up every corner he had tried to keep dim. Gary worked with a tension I hadn't seen before. He typed less, walked more, rearranged things that didn't need rearranging. He kept glancing at me as if waiting for me to give him some direction or emotional cue. But I didn't. And without the constant reassurance he had relied on, he seemed to falter. When a pallet arrived mislabeled, instead of snapping at the workers, he hesitated. When the forklift driver asked a question, Gary deferred to me. When the inventory rep asked for clarifications, Gary stepped back as if he was afraid of being seen doing the wrong thing. It was strange watching him like that, shrinking instead of expanding. Later, when we walked to the car, he said quietly, "You didn't say much today." There wasn't much to say, he nodded, swallowing hard. "Are you unhappy with me?" His voice cracked slightly, so small I almost missed it. "I'm figuring things out," I replied softly. "I don't want to lose you," he said suddenly, his voice raw in a way that made me pause. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an apology, it was fear. Fear of consequences. Fear of change. Fear of losing the version of me that made his life easier. But not fear of losing me the person. He didn't see that difference. I did. He tried to talk. He hovered near me. He fussed with his suitcase. He paced. He said my name twice, each time softer than the last. But I wasn't avoiding him, I was simply no longer cushioning him. And without the softness he depended on, he felt exposed. Around dinner time, he finally sat across from me on the edge of the bed. I feel like something's slipping through my fingers, he whispered. What do you mean? You, us, everything. I folded my hands on my lap. I haven't gone anywhere, but you feel far. I'm just thinking, I repeated. He nodded, then looked down at his hands. They told me I was lucky, he said, almost to himself. Friends, coworkers, people always said you were too good for me. I didn't react. He continued quietly. I never told you that. I didn't want you to think you could do better. I inhaled softly. For the first time, he had spoken something unfiltered, something real, something revealing. He didn't love me in the way I had wanted, he needed me. Needed the version of me who smoothed the world for him, who held the emotional weight, who absorbed his storms so he didn't have to face them. And he could feel that version slipping away. He exhaled shakily. I'm scared. I don't know why I'm telling you that. I guess I'm afraid you'll wake up one day and realize you shouldn't be here. I didn't answer, because I already had. Gary tried to act normal. He put on a movie, offered snacks, made small jokes that didn't land. He kept glancing over at me, hoping the familiar rhythm would return. But something in me had grown too steady, too clear, too centered to fall back into old patterns. At one point, he paused the movie and said, "Can we talk, really talk?" I nodded gently. He took a long breath. I know I haven't been easy to be with. That was an understatement, but I didn't interrupt. And I know I haven't always treated you right. Another understatement. But I want to do better. I want to fix things. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to make you stay. The words were soft, desperate, sincere in their own incomplete way. But they weren't enough, not because he was incapable of more, but because I had already seen too much. My voice was quiet but firm. I don't think this is about fixing things. He frowned. What do you mean? It's about understanding what's real. He blinked, confused. What's real? That we've both been pretending. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I continued gently. You pretend you're fine. I pretend I'm not hurting. You pretend you're in control. I pretend I'm not exhausted. He swallowed. And now, I said softly, I'm tired of pretending. He stared at me, breathing heavily, not angry, not defensive, but scared, truly scared. Are you leaving me? He whispered. I haven't decided anything yet, I said honestly. But something needs to change. What? His voice cracked. Tell me, I'll do it. He meant it. But he meant it the way a drowning person promises to swim better once they're on shore. Promises made in panic rarely survive peace. I stood up and walked toward the window. The city lights flickered softly outside, warm and unbothered, as if unaware of the quiet breaking happening inside our hotel room. Behind me, Gary whispered, "Please don't give up on me." I didn't turn around. "I'm not giving up," I said gently. "I'm waking up." The room fell silent. And somewhere in that silence, the escalation reached its full height, not with shouting, not with accusations, not with anger, but with truth. A truth that had been waiting years to be spoken. A truth that could no longer be softened or postponed. A truth that would lead us, inevitably, toward the next part of the story, whether that was healing or ending or something in between. Morning arrived softer than usual. The light coming through the curtains wasn't bright or dramatic. It was pale, quiet, almost reluctant. It matched the way I felt inside. After everything that happened in the lobby, after the shouting, after the truth spilled out of Gary, with the same carelessness he'd always reserved for my feelings. I expected to wake up feeling shattered or furious or hollow, but instead I felt still. Not calm, calm is a choice. Stillness is something else altogether. Stillness comes when there are no more illusions left to protect, when the truth has already done the damage and all that's left is the settling of dust. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the faint chill of the morning pressing against my skin, my hands folded in my lap. My thoughts weren't racing. They weren't spiraling. They were simply there, quiet, steady, observing. For the first time in a long time, nothing inside me felt like it was trying to run from the truth. Gary was still asleep, or pretending to be. His breathing had that unnatural rhythm he always had when he wanted to avoid a conversation. Even without looking at him, I could sense the tension, the stiffness, the forced rise and fall of his chest, his favorite method of escape. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to face what he'd said. And he definitely didn't want to face what he'd revealed. But I did. Last night, after his confession, if you could call it that, he shut down completely. He claimed he didn't mean it that way, that he wasn't actually leaving, that he just said it in anger. A dozen excuses, a dozen contradictions, none of which carried enough conviction to matter. For years, I had absorbed his uncertainty, his mood swings, his doubts. But now his words had consequences. Not because they always hurt, but because this time something inside me refused to bend around them. I stood up slowly, the carpet soft under my feet, and walked toward the window. The city outside looked exactly the same as yesterday. People going to work, cars honking, buses trailing long sighs of exhaust down the street, but I wasn't the same. For years, I believed that relationships broke in dramatic moments, betrayals, affairs, explosive fights, life-altering arguments. But now I knew the truth. Most relationships don't end with explosions. They end with quiet realizations, with small truths whispered in empty rooms, with the moment you finally understand you've been trying to save something that was never trying to save you. A soft knock on the door startled me. I turned, and for a second I thought maybe it was housekeeping. But when I opened it, I found Alina, our assistant manager from the store, standing in the hall. Her expression held that delicate mixture of politeness and concern, the kind you wear when you're trying not to intrude but you already know too much. "I came to check on you," she said gently. "After everything that happened yesterday, I didn't want you to be alone." I stepped aside to let her in. Gary, sensing another witness to his discomfort, rolled over and pretended to be asleep again. Alina didn't comment. She just looked at me with a softness I didn't know how to receive. I wasn't used to being cared for. I wasn't used to anyone noticing when I was hurting. "Do you want to get breakfast downstairs?" she asked quietly. "Just you and me," I nodded. Because for the first time, I didn't feel obligated to wait for Gary. For the first time, my life didn't revolve around managing his moods. As we walked out, I didn't bother waking him. I didn't leave a note. I didn't explain anything. If he asked later, I'd tell him the truth. I didn't think about him, because for once I didn't have to. Soft music hummed through the room. A few business travelers sat scattered around, half asleep over their coffees. The air smelled like toasted bread and warm pastries. Alina chose a quiet table near the window, and I sat across from her. At first, we didn't talk. We just let the silence settle comfortably between us, something I wasn't used to. Silence with Gary was always sharp, uncomfortable, filled with tension. But this silence, it felt like a warm blanket, not a cold wall. Finally, she spoke. "Yesterday must have been horrible for you." Her tone wasn't pitying, it was steady and compassionate, and somehow that steadiness made the truth easier to hold. "It was a lot," I said softly, stirring my tea even though I didn't need to. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" she asked. I hesitated, not because I didn't trust her, but because I wasn't used to trusting anyone at all. But then the words began to come, slowly at first, then with steady rhythm. I told her about the argument, about Gary's confession, about the cracks that had been forming long before yesterday. I didn't dramatize anything. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't try to justify or defend him. I just told the truth. And Alina listened, not with shock, not with judgment, but with a kind of understanding that made my shoulders feel lighter with every sentence. When I finished, she reached across the table and gently covered my hand with hers. "You deserve better than this," she said. Simple words, but they landed in a place I didn't even know needed healing. I exhaled, a slow, trembling sound, not from sadness, from release. You don't have to decide anything today, she continued softly. But you don't have to keep carrying this alone, carrying it alone. I had been doing that for so long I didn't even know it had a name. I looked out the window, watching the people pass by on the street, some rushing, some strolling, some laughing, some lost in their own storms. None of them knew what was cracking open inside me, and for once that was okay. The weight on my chest felt lighter, not gone but shifting, redistributing itself in a way that no longer crushed me. When breakfast ended, Elena squeezed my shoulder gently before leaving. "If you need me anything, anytime, I'm here," she said. And for the first time in years, I believed someone meant it. Not asleep now, waiting, stewing, his eyes lifted sharply when I walked in. "Where did you go?" he demanded. Not "are you okay?" Not "can we talk?" Not "I'm sorry." Just control, always control. I closed the door behind me, the soft click sounding strangely final. "Breakfast," I said simply. "You could have told me. I didn't think it mattered." His jaw tightened. "Everything matters when it involves us." I met his eyes, really met them, and he froze. Because for the first time I wasn't speaking from fear or guilt or desperation to keep the peace. I was speaking from clarity. "There is no us if only one of us is trying," I said softly. He flinched. Not dramatically, just a small flicker of recognition, like he saw, for the first time, the reflection of what he'd created. And that was when the true resolution began. Not the ending of something, but the beginning of me. I could feel the tension rolling off him, thick, uneasy, unpredictable. He wasn't used to this version of me. He wasn't used to a silence he couldn't control. He wasn't used to my calm because my calm didn't belong to him. It wasn't fear disguised as quiet obedience. It was something else now, something he couldn't name. "Are you seriously doing this again?" he finally said, voice low, defensive. "Acting like I'm the bad guy." The words landed with a dull thud, familiar, rehearsed, the same lines he always used when he felt cornered. "I'm not acting," I said softly. "I'm just not pretending anymore." His eyes narrowed. "So what now? You break down in the lobby, embarrass me in front of everyone, and suddenly you're the victim." Embarrass him. There it was, the root of his concern. I didn't answer right away. I walked past him, quietly gathering the documents scattered on the desk, inventory sheets, purchase orders, notes from the managers. My hands moved steadily, without the tremble he was so accustomed to seeing. "Really?" he snapped. "You're not even going to talk about this?" "I did talk," I said calmly. "You chose not to listen." He scoffed, the sound small and bitter. "You're being dramatic." "I'm being honest." He hated that answer. Honesty was a language he only liked when it came from him. He stood suddenly, the bed shifting beneath him. "So what does that mean? You want to leave me? You want to throw away everything we built, over one argument?" I turned to face him fully. "This isn't about last night," I said gently. "This is about everything before last night." He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Because he knew. Because deep down, beneath his excuses and deflections, he felt the truth pressing against him too. I walked toward my suitcase and opened it. The zipper's smooth, quiet sound seemed to slice through the air between us. "Are you packing?" he asked sharply. "I'm gathering my things." "Same thing." "No," I said, closing the suitcase halfway. "Packing is emotional, this is practical." His chest rose sharply as if the distinction offended him. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Where are you even going to go?" "I don't know yet." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." Stepped in front of me, trying to block my path, not aggressively, but with a kind of desperate uncertainty. He wasn't yelling now. He wasn't angry. He was confused, because for years I had always folded, I had always softened, I had always compromised, often to the point of disappearing. But this time I wasn't trying to win. I wasn't trying to punish him. I wasn't trying to make him understand. I was simply choosing myself. Something I hadn't done in a very, very long time. Can we sit and talk? He asked finally, voice quieter. A few months ago, I would have rushed to him. A few weeks ago, I would have sat immediately. Even yesterday, I might have given him the benefit of the doubt. But now, I'll sit, I said softly. But I can't promise you'll like what I say. He swallowed hard. Just talk. We sat across from each other, he on the edge of the bed, me in the chair by the window. The light fell between us like a thin barrier neither of us wanted to cross. I took a breath. For years, I began, I tried to be everything you needed. I tried to support you, build with you, help you. I believed in us more than I believed in myself. And I thought if I just worked harder, if I just understood you better, if I just stayed patient long enough, you'd eventually meet me halfway. He looked down, guilt flickering across his face. I didn't realize how lonely I was, I continued. Not until yesterday. Not until you said you wanted to leave, and the first thing I felt wasn't fear, it was relief. His head jerked up. Relief, he repeated, stunned. I nodded, the truth heavier than my voice. Because it meant I didn't have to keep fighting for something I was carrying alone. His breath trembled slightly. A small, almost imperceptible crack appeared in the mask he always wore. I didn't mean it, he whispered. I said it because I was angry, you know how I get. That's the problem, I replied gently. How you get has become the center of our relationship. He blinked, thrown, not by anger, by honesty. I continued, my voice low but unwavering. I didn't fall in love to become someone's emotional caretaker. I didn't build a life to walk on eggshells every day. I'm tired, Gary, not of you but of losing myself in the process of loving you. He looked away, jaw clenched. I watched him carefully, not out of fear but out of clarity. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't cruel for the sake of cruelty. He was simply a man who didn't know how to love without control. And I didn't know how to love without shrinking. We were a pattern neither of us had the strength to break. Until now, he finally spoke. What do you want me to say? Nothing, I whispered. I'm not asking for anything anymore. The truth settled between us like dust on still air. I just need you to know, I said softly, that whatever happens next, it's not revenge, it's not punishment, it's not impulsive. He looked up, eyes shining with something he wasn't used to showing, fear. It's a decision I should have made a long time ago, I finished. He swallowed again. Are you ending this? I didn't answer right away because endings aren't loud. They're not sharp, they aren't dramatic. They're slow, quiet, gentle, like a window slowly closing on a room you've outgrown. I'm choosing myself, I said finally. His lips parted. No anger now, just silence. He stood abruptly and walked toward the bathroom, closing the door behind him with a careful, controlled click, not a slam, not a shout. And that was when I knew he understood. He wasn't losing an argument. He was losing me. When Gary closed the bathroom door behind him, the room went still. So still that I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant hallway footsteps every now and then. But mostly it was just silence. A silence I had never allowed myself to sit in before. I stared at my half-open suitcase. My clothes sat inside neatly, but my life felt scattered across the floor in ways that didn't fit in any bag. I didn't know how long Gary stayed in the bathroom. It could have been 10 minutes or 40. Time felt different, slow, stretched, and suspended, like everything was waiting for the next breath, the next step, the next sentence. For once, I didn't fill the silence with thoughts of what he might be thinking. I didn't rehearse responses. I didn't anticipate the next argument. I just sat, hands resting on my lap, feet flat on the carpet, chest rising and falling in a steady, unhindered rhythm. It was the first calm I had felt in years. Eventually, the bathroom door opened. Gary walked out slowly. He looked unsure, and that alone was something new. He stood there for a moment, as if trying to gather the right expression. Not angry, not defensive, not dismissive, just lost. I didn't know you felt this way, he said quietly. In another life, another relationship, another pattern, I might have softened at that line. I might have rushed in to reassure him, to make excuses for him, to convince him that everything could be fixed if we tried a little harder. But I had grown tired of diminishing myself to make space for his comfort. I tried to tell you, I said calmly. Many times. But you didn't take me seriously. He nodded, a small, defeated motion. I thought you were just emotional or overthinking. I was. He sat on his side of the bed, elbows resting on his knees. I don't want to lose you. His voice cracked slightly, not dramatic, not forced, just real, and that made it harder because people aren't all good or all bad. They're complicated. They're wounded. And sometimes they hurt others in ways they never intend to. Losing me didn't happen today, I said gently. It happened slowly, over years. I just finally caught up to it. He stared at the floor, his hands clasped tightly together. What do you want from me? I don't want anything, I said softly. Not anymore. His shoulders dropped. There is a particular kind of grief that comes when someone realizes their power over you has faded, not because you fought them, but because you learned you didn't need them the way you once did. That was the grief sitting on his face. He looked up. Are you leaving right now? No, I said. I'm staying until morning. I'm not running out of the room in anger. I'm not disappearing. I'm just shifting. He let out a long, unsteady breath. Can we talk, really talk, without the arguing? We can talk, I said, but it won't change what I'm feeling. I know, he whispered, but I want to hear it. So we talked. Not like before. Not like two people trying to win or control or salvage something. We talked like two tired souls who had run out of excuses. He asked me when I started feeling unhappy. I told him it wasn't a moment, it was a slow erosion. He asked me why I hadn't pushed harder for therapy or a break or something. I told him I didn't want to fix something alone. He asked if I still loved him. I told him love wasn't the problem. Love had always been there. What was missing was gentleness, partnership, emotional safety. And he listened. Truly listened. Maybe for the first time. At one point, he covered his face with both hands. His voice came out muffled, as if he was speaking through a lifetime of unprocessed pain. I never meant to make you feel small. I know, I said gently, but intention doesn't erase impact. He nodded, hands still hiding the expression he didn't want me to see. Shame, fear, regret. All the things he was never brave enough to show when it mattered. I don't know how to change fast enough to keep you, he said. You don't have to change fast, I replied softly. You have to change honestly. The sentence hung in the air. He lowered his hands and looked at me, not with anger, not with denial, but with a kind of quiet acceptance I didn't expect to see. What happens tomorrow? He asked. Tomorrow, I said, we wake up, we breathe, we don't force anything, we don't rush, we take a step at a time. He nodded slowly. And tonight, he whispered. Tonight we rest, I said. Not as partners clinging to something broken, not as enemies, just two people who shared years and now need a moment to let those years settle. His eyes softened with something close to sorrow. Can you stay? He asked, not out of desperation, but out of a genuine need for closure. I can stay, I said, but we'll sleep on opposite sides of the bed. He accepted that with a small, silent nod. We got ready for bed quietly, the way people do when they are trying to handle their emotions carefully, like fragile glass ornaments that might shatter if held too firmly. He lay on his side, facing the wall. I lay on mine, facing the window. The space between us felt both wide and peaceful. Not a battlefield, not a punishment, just space. Breathable space. And for the first time in a long time, I fell asleep without worrying about his mood, or his tone, or his reactions. I fell asleep knowing I had finally found my voice, and my voice had finally found its freedom. When morning came, it arrived gently, no alarms, no raised voices, no tension, just a soft gray light slipping through the curtains and settling across the room. For a moment, I forgot where I was. The quiet felt unfamiliar, peaceful, almost like waking up in a version of my life where everything had been simple all along. But then I turned slightly and saw Gary lying on the far side of the bed, his back still facing me. His breathing was steady, but I could tell he wasn't asleep. His shoulders were too rigid, his posture too careful. He was awake. He was waiting. I sat up slowly, letting the stillness settle around us. I didn't speak yet. I wanted the moment to land softly, not rushed, not forced, not tangled in expectation. A few seconds later, he exhaled and rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. "You're really leaving today," he said quietly. It wasn't a question, it was a realization. I nodded gently. "Yeah." He closed his eyes for a long moment. Maybe he was trying to swallow the truth. Maybe he was trying to make peace with it, maybe both. "I didn't sleep much," he admitted. "I know," I said softly. He turned his head to look at me. Not with accusation, not with anger, but with a hollow kind of sadness I didn't recognize on his face before. "Is there anything I can say," he whispered, "that would make you stay?" The question hung there like a fragile thread between us. And I could have said many things. I could have said, "You should have asked that years ago." Or, "It's too late now." Or, "You can't fix everything with words." But I didn't want to wound him. I didn't want to turn the ending into another fight. I didn't want to walk away with bitterness in either of our hearts, so I answered honestly, gently. "Not today," I said. A quiet breath escaped him, almost like acceptance, almost like grief. He sat up, rubbing his hands together the way he always did when he wasn't sure what to do next. "I wish I had been better," he murmured. "I wish I knew how to be better." "You still can be," I said softly. "Just not for us, not right now." He nodded slowly, eyes down. We moved through the morning like two people sharing a space for the last time, carefully, quietly, with a sense of respect that had been missing for years. He brushed his teeth while I folded my clothes. I zipped my suitcase while he put on his boots. The sounds were small, domestic, ordinary, but the weight beneath them was. When I was done packing, I looked around the room one last time. The bed was unmade. The curtains were half open. Two coffee cups from the night before sat on the table, both still half full. Nothing about the room looked like an ending, but everything about the moment did. Gary walked toward me, stopping a few feet away. He hesitated, then extended his hand, not for a handshake but for a silent, tentative goodbye. I took it. His hand was warm, trembling slightly. The grip wasn't tight or desperate, it wasn't a plea, it was gratitude, and maybe a little regret. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said quietly. "I hope you learn how to be gentle with yourself as much as with others," I replied. His eyes softened, but he didn't cry. I didn't either. Some endings don't come with tears. Some endings arrive with acceptance. I reached for the door. My suitcase rolled softly behind me. Right before I stepped out, he said, "Can I ask one more thing?" I turned. "Of course." Was I ever enough? His voice cracked just slightly. I held his gaze. There were many things I could have said, cruel truths, comforting lies, everything in between, but I chose the truth wrapped in kindness. "You were enough for the version of me who didn't know her worth," I said, "and I hope one day you'll be enough for someone who doesn't have to shrink to fit beside you." He looked down, a single slow nod shaking his shoulders. It was the closest thing to closure either of us would get. I stepped into the hallway, pulling the door gently shut behind me. No slam. No dramatic walkout, just a quiet farewell to a story that had run its course. When the latch clicked softly into place, it didn't feel like losing something. It felt like setting something down, a weight I had carried too long, a life that no longer fit, a chapter ready to end. I walked toward the elevator with a strange mix of heaviness and lightness in my chest. My steps were steady, my breathing calm. For the first time in years, I felt like I was walking toward myself, not away from something. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, I whispered to myself, "You're free." Not because I had escaped something terrible, Not because I had defeated someone, not because I had won. I was free because I had finally chosen myself without fear, and sometimes freedom is nothing more than the quiet courage to leave. Gary didn't respond to my last message. Not immediately, not that night, not in the week that followed. And strangely, I didn't wait for his reply the way I once would have. There was a time when I lived in the quiet ache between his sentences, measuring my value by how quickly he spoke to me, how gently he phrased things, how close he stayed. But now the silence didn't sting, it just settled, like dust on a table that had already been cleared. I chose not to message him again, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I finally realized the truth. Some closures don't come from the other person. Some closures come from deciding that you've heard enough. I focused on work, on the simplicity of routines, on the small, quiet parts of my life that had always held space for me, and slowly, almost invisibly, I began to reclaim myself. There was no dramatic transformation, no sudden confidence, no triumphant soundtrack, just tiny moments. Moments where I breathed easier, moments where I didn't check my phone, moments where I didn't replay his sentences in my mind. Healing wasn't loud, it was quiet. Healing wasn't fast, it was patient. Healing wasn't prideful, it was peaceful. One evening, while sorting through work files, my phone buzzed. Gary, his message was short. "I'm sorry for everything, I know it doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it." A few months ago, I would have folded under those words, relief, hope, confusion, longing. But now I just felt calm, not angry, not bitter, not triumphant, just calm. I typed a simple reply. "Thank you. I genuinely hope life is kind to you. No accusations, no unfinished arguments, no emotional unraveling, because closure wasn't about what he said. Closure was about the person I no longer had to be when speaking to him." After I hit send, I set the phone aside and stepped outside. The air was cool. The sky was soft. The world felt spacious again. And for the first time in a long time, I realized something so simple, so gentle, and so true. I didn't need him to lose anything for me to heal. I just needed to stop losing myself. Part 5 didn't end with a dramatic confrontation or a final painful scene. It ended with something quieter, something steadier, something earned. A small, steady sense of peace. A life turning forward again. Life didn't change all at once. It didn't rise up with some triumphant feeling or wrap itself neatly around me like a final chapter in a novel. It changed in small, nearly invisible ways, little shifts in the rhythm of my days, quiet adjustments in the way my heart moved through the world. Weeks passed, then months. And in that time, the sharpness of everything softened, the heaviness lightened, and the story I had been carrying began to feel like something that had already happened, not something still happening to me. I didn't forget Gary. People don't just vanish from memory because the story has ended, but remembering him stopped hurting. Sometimes the past doesn't leave a scar, sometimes it just leaves a lesson. One morning, as I drove to a client site, I caught myself humming, not because life was perfect, but because something inside me had quietly returned, something I hadn't realized was missing. A sense of self, a sense of steadiness, of belonging to my own life again. I no longer checked my phone out of habit. I no longer interpreted every vibration as an emotional warning. I no longer walked through my days bracing for disappointment. The absence of fear is its own kind of peace. And peace, I learned, rarely announces its arrival. It slips in quietly, through the moments we stop trying so hard to hold everything together. One evening, after a long day, I cooked dinner and sat by the window. The street outside hummed with life, children playing, distant conversations, the low sound of a motorcycle passing by. Nothing extraordinary, but it felt beautiful in a simple, ordinary way. For the longest time, I had tied my sense of worth to someone else's affection, to their replies, their moods, their attention. Losing Gary wasn't just losing a person, it was losing the version of myself who believed that being chosen was the same as being valued. But now, sitting there in the soft glow of my living room light, I didn't feel unchosen. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt whole in a way that didn't depend on anyone else's presence. Later that week, I ran into an old colleague at a cafe. She asked how I'd been, what I'd been up to, how work was going. And I realized I talked about my life without shrinking, without apologizing, without trying to explain the pieces that had once felt too tangled to share. Healing is not about forgetting the past. It's about no longer living according to its wounds. One night, months later, I opened the messages between Gary and me. Not to revisit anything, not to feel anything, just to acknowledge how far I had come. I scrolled slowly, seeing the old versions of myself in every paragraph, every hesitation, every apology. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel longing. I felt compassion. For the woman who had tried so hard to be enough. For the woman who had hoped with her whole heart. For the woman who had stayed longer than she should have, not because she was weak, but because she cared deeply. And caring deeply is never a flaw. I closed the conversation, archived it, and for the first time felt no urge to keep it accessible. The past didn't need to be destroyed, it just needed to be put away. As seasons shifted and the world moved forward around me, I found myself moving too, not with force, not with determination, but with gentle acceptance. Some stories end quietly. Some transformations happen in whispers. One morning, standing outside after a meeting, a soft breeze brushed my hair, and I realized something that almost made me smile. I no longer measured myself by what I had lost. I measured myself by what I had learned. And I had learned so much. I learned that love without stability isn't love, it's longing. I learned that apologies don't erase patterns, they just soften them. I learned that attention isn't the same thing as commitment. I learned that hope can be both beautiful and dangerous. But most of all, I learned that I can survive the ending of a story I once believed would last. Life didn't give me a dramatic closing scene. It gave me something better, a gentle return to myself. On a quiet evening, almost a year after everything began, I sat outside with a cup of tea. The sky was painted in soft shades of gold and blue, and the world felt calm, unhurried, patient. And for the first time, truly and completely, I understood the meaning of healing. Healing is when the story no longer controls your breath. Healing is when you remember without feeling broken. Healing is when you can look back with softness, not pain. I took a slow breath, let it out, and felt my entire body settle. This chapter of my life had ended, not with anger, not with bitterness, not with unfinished sentences, but with peace. A quiet, steady peace that felt like the truest kind of closure. And as I stood up, ready to walk back inside, I realized endings aren't always about loss. Sometimes they are simply about beginning again as someone wiser, softer, stronger, and finally free. Thanks for listening. If you like this story, please like, share, and please subscribe my channel for support me. See you in the next video.